The D-Day is coming. On June 23rd, Great Britain will hold its national referendum, deciding whether the country should stay on inside the European Union or not. And what would that decision mean for Europe, for the world, and for Korea? We'll talk about that right here in this program, Upfront.
Since the end of the Second World War, European people have wanted to build an integrated community to achieve further growth. And in 1993, the European Union was finally established. The goal of the establishment of the EU was to promote economic and social growth by building an integrated market and to enhance the status of Europe within the global stage by forming common security and diplomatic strategies. Along with 28 member states, including France, Germany, and Britain, the EU has achieved significant growth as one of the strongest economic powers with a population of 500 million, and as one of the most influential political communities in the global society. However, political divisions have recently been deepened, along with the continuing terrorist attacks and controversies over the acceptance of refugees. Moreover, along with the continuous financial crisis for the recent several years, there have been signs of division within the European Union. And Britain has been at the center of the controversies over the possible division of the EU. As the world's fifth largest economy, Britain has played a significant role in the EU both economically and politically. However, controversies have risen over Britain's possible withdrawal from the EU, which has been often called Brexit. There have been sharply divided opinions within Britain that it should leave the EU to tackle the economic crisis and refugee issue, while others have declared that Britain should remain in the EU. And only a week is left until a referendum on Britain's future with the EU, which will take place on June 23rd. Considering the ongoing arguments for and against Brexit, decisions of the undecided voters are expected to play a significant role. The EU, as well as the international community, have galvanized efforts to deter Britain's withdrawal from the EU. There has been the outlook that Brexit might lead to additional withdrawal of other EU countries. And Brexit is also expected to bring about a significant economic damage to the European region, along with other economic and refugee issues. Only a few days are left until the Brexit vote. And Upfront discusses the major controversies over Brexit and its potential impact on the global economy.
Okay, for today's discussion, we have two guests in studio. First, Ernst Lee, Professor of International Studies at Hanyang University. He's joining us right here. Thank you very much for joining us.
Great pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And Professor Jun-sok, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea, joining us once again. Thank you very much.
Happy to be here.
Okay, this is a very exciting subject because by the time we air this program, we will have about a week or less remaining before the big D-Day, June 23rd. The Great Britain making their decision here. First of all, for our general audience, we have to clarify the term itself, Brexit. The British exit, I suppose, would be what it means. But starting with Professor Lee, let's go upfront, just like our program name says. What's your outlook in terms of Brexit? A lot of people are making their own different bets and all that, but what do you see ahead?
Well, UK has been a core member of the EU in the beginning when Europe has brought the concept to be united.
Right.
But two parts, economic union and political union. So Great Britain has joined the political union, but they refrained to join economic and financial union. As a result, but they have been doing a lot of efforts to stimulate the economy in the EU.
Right.
But a lot of financial contribution and political contribution. But there has been an escalating opinion in the UK that is it worthy stay in the EU while staying out of the financial union?
Right.
So this is a very critical issue. and in regard to their financial status in the UK at the economy of global financial crisis. Not crisis here, but it's beginning to recognize the global economy has been slowing down.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the overall backdrop. And in terms of making bets, Professor Yang, what is your outlook here?
Okay, well, the polls show that the side which wants to exit and which side which wants to leave is almost neck and neck, almost 50-50.
Right.
But the nice thing about United Kingdom, I think, is that they have a lot of betting parlors. And according to British newspapers, if you look at the betting parlors,
Right.
The probability that United Kingdom will stay in EU, even though the poll says it's half and half. If you look at how much people actually bet,
Right.
The chances of remaining are about 75%.
So you're going with the majority at this point?
Well, I think the opinions of people who actually put money on the bet tends to be more sincere than
Okay.
people who answer reporters on the phone.
Okay, so economists going with the money affairs, and then when you see the people placing their money, that's the way you're going to go with. Well, the political scientist myself, I'm always continuing saying in politics you never know what's going to happen, tomorrow. So that's why economists are making all these confident bets, and we're envious about that. Anyway, so those are backgrounds, and then your outlook here. And another critical background here is something that Professor Lee has already touched upon. That is UK within the context of EU here. And what can we say? UK is the world's fifth largest economy
Right.
to begin with. And Winston Churchill himself was the one there were several people who actually presented the idea of European Union or European community. But if anyone, Winston Churchill was one of the strongest advocates
Right.
of this community or union here. But now what? The UK decided not to join the currency union,
Right.
staying out of the Eurozone. And so overall, what is UK, having built your own experience in UK, what is UK within the context of EU or Europe?
Well, I think the paradigm has been changed by the time that Winston Churchill has brought up the issue that Europe should be united. That's the point that when UK was strong enough with the other European countries. So UK was one of the winning countries that bailed out Europe together with Roosevelt. Right. At that time, what he meant was it's good to be united, but led by UK. However, at this point, from the starting point, this European Union and European Monetary Union was led by France and Germany. So there is a kind of political conceptual resistance from UK people. Right, UK is not the dominant power. Of course, it's fifth largest world economy, but in the Europe, in special regard to European Union, they are the second tier. So there was slightly lost the pride. So we have to look at this point from two dimensions, I think. The political dimension, which is conceptual one, but as Dr. Yang said, from practical standpoint, some political dimension standpoint, that's the UK people's inherent resistance to the joining or staying or out of the EU, whereby this union was not led by UK.
I see.
And also, actually looking at the background, historical background, as you may know, there was 100 years of war between France and UK,
Of course,
Rules of War.
Yep.
So when UK was strong enough, they came to the continent, they have fought against France and other countries. But this time, they've been staying out. So they should agree on the concept of the united Europe, because as Winston Churchill said, but they are very much critical about sovereign rights of the country. The country should have its own sovereign right to decide whatever they want, but still coordinate. But if this union has been led by the UK, then I think it will be a different dimension. But this time, I think this is what they have in mind.
Professor Lee shared with us several points here, but looks like he has indicated that UK staying behind Germany in terms of economic power makes them feel that they're not really hot about the European Union being in there. But would you say, when would you say that started? For instance, we think about Thatcher, right? She was quite against the idea of, unlike Winston Churchill, against the idea of doing things together with European Union and so on. Is this all economy that has driven the British people, kind of moving them away from the idea of one Europe?
Well, I think the economic problems and economic policy has accelerated or amplified some of the differences, but I think some of the differences were already there. Now, the United Kingdom is basically an island. It's separated by the British Channel. And I think because of that, I think the British people remain sort of separate from Europe, the continent.
Culturally and
even I think mentally, I think is the most important because, well, if you look at Germany, France, Austria, those mainland areas, well, they had so many wars that the borders changed a lot. I mean, regions like Alsace belonged in Germany and then in France. So I think it's easier for people in the mainland to think of themselves as one mass, whereas England never has been really been invaded like that. So they had separate mentality to begin with, and then you hear about the Anglo-Saxon mentality. So compared to, say, Germany and France, they're more likely to be in favor of, say, smaller government, more laissez-faire economics. And because of the global financial crisis, if you look at the policies that they've taken, then the British has been taking compared to the France, Germany, Austria, they've been taking a much more active, more, say, Keynesian type of intervention. And they've been having a higher economic growth rate as a result. And as Professor Lee mentioned, they're not part of the Eurozone. So I think the fact that they're doing better economically, it's attracting a lot of immigrants, and it's making the difference between the mainland Europe and the United Kingdom more clear. It's also because they're doing better economically, they don't really have confidence in the European Union government.
Better than most of the economies on the continent, but not necessarily better than all countries, right? I mean, in comparison with Germany, they're not doing that well in that sense.
They're not doing that well, but if you
sense of inferiority in terms of in its relationship with Germany, I think. Would you think that's another important factor, though?
It's somewhat of an important factor, but what you see, and I guess we're going to talk about this more later on as well, is that London and England has become a very popular destination for Eastern Europeans who are looking for better job. And that's also been feeding into this as well. And it's basically because the United Kingdom right now seems to be a much more dynamic economy with similar growth rates Germany.
Okay. Is there a fundamental philosophical difference or approach to economics between UK on one hand and across the water on the continental Europe, you know, the Anglo-Saxons and then continental Europe?
Well, there seems to be. Right now, the German and French government seems to be more interested in trying to regulate the financial market because of the global financial crisis, whereas in UK, well, they did have some initial regulations, more regulations at the beginning of the crisis, but now they've climbed out of most of it, and they seem to be much more interested in going back to the laissez-faire type of market because that's where London has its strength in. And that seems to be creating a lot of conflict, along with the tight fiscal policy, and the UK, which seems to be aiming for a much more expansionary policy. So that kind of policy differences that we've seen in the global financial crisis, I think made the differences more clear.
Austerity, discipline on one hand, on the German side, largely defined, and then more of the freedom, laissez-faire on the English-British side. Okay, on those points, we have actually experts connected to us, with us, and they are talking from the UK here. We have, first of all, Professor Patrick Minford. He's applied economics professor at the Business School of Cardiff University. And also we have another professor, Ismail Erturk. He is a professor of business at the University of Manchester. Welcome and thank you very much for joining us. First of all, my first question goes to Professor Erturk. Professor, overall, tell us upfront what your position is regarding this Brexit controversy.
Within the Conservative Party, there has always been a strong fraction who wanted to leave the European Union for mostly political purposes because of sovereignty. But then what happened in 2007, we had a financial crisis, and then there was a Eurozone crisis in 2010. So increasingly, the news from the European Union was negative. Countries like Greece, Spain, Portugal. So there has been also an economic momentum added to the traditional arguments for leaving Europe within the Conservative Party.
Okay, now let's move on to Professor Minford. Your position, I guess your position would be slightly different. Tell us your overall standing regarding this big controversy.
Well, I think we should leave, and we should use the opportunity of leaving to get rid of all the EU trade barriers, which are important and damage us because we are a free trading country, and the protectionism of the EU is damaging to us. They put large trade barriers that raise prices for food and also for manufactured goods like cars and refrigerators and laptops. They all cost more in the EU because of EU protectionism. So we want to get rid of that. And also we want to get rid of the top-down intrusive regulation that comes from the EU on every aspect of our lives, because we're in this customs union protected area. They put a lot of regulation on us on all aspects of our industrial life. And this is very intrusive. For example, working time directive, we can't work more than 48 hours a week, and they always want to kind of reduce that. This is all very intrusive. So we want to get rid of all that and go to free trade and more free markets. And that will give us a gain to the economy of, we calculate, more than 4% of GDP.
Okay, while Professor Erturk expressed concerns against the exit, Professor Minford, who just we talked to, expressed support for the Brexit itself. So my follow-up question goes to Professor Minford here. You have mentioned the benefits of the exit here, but however, the biggest concern is about the actual impact and the side effect and what's going to happen, consequence of the exit itself. How do you respond to those economic concerns?
The point is that the opponents of British leaving the EU, or Brexit as we call it, they say, oh, it'll be terrible because we will lose the treatment of free trade treatment of the EU for our exporters, and that will be damaging to the British economy. So they have looked at that and said that'll be very damaging for our exporters. But what they've forgotten is that when we leave the EU for free trade, we get rid of all the import tariffs and trade barriers on what we buy from everybody else in the world. And this lowers, when we get rid of this means we get much cheaper products of food and manufacturing from the rest of the world, which lowers the cost of living very greatly by up to 16%. That then creates a terrific impact for other industries in the UK, the service industry, 90% of the economy. The rest of the economy that isn't protected, about 90%, and 92% of workers, those industries are benefited by lower prices from buying from the rest of the world, and they are stimulated. And also consumers are better off. So consumer welfare rises, which is the whole point of the exercise of economics, to make consumers better off.
Well, Professor Minford mentioned the freedom from the EU restrictions and so on would actually greatly benefit the UK. But Professor Erturk, your response to that, what would you say?
I mean, the major problems that the UK economy is facing today are the current account deficit, i.e. UK doesn't export as much as it imports, so there's a trade deficit. And that trade deficit needs to be financed with money flowing into UK. Now, that's because the UK has chosen in the past not to invest in manufacturing. So basically, it is not an EU decision that the UK shouldn't be investing in skills, in infrastructure, or in manufacturing. It was a UK decision. And then UK allowed finance, especially London, to become very big. Again, that wasn't a European Union decision, it was a UK decision. And because finance was so big, when there was a financial crisis, the UK banks that suffered and also costed the country, like Royal Bank of Scotland, Northern Rock, they were all doing domestic transactions rather than transactions with the EU countries. So those failing UK banks, and there were big failures, like Royal Bank of Scotland had to be rescued, or HBOS. All those failing banks, they failed because of their operations in the UK, not in the EU. So that's I mean, a UK problem. The UK economy is not exporting enough, it is not competitive, and it's not productive enough. And these are as a result of UK government's policies going back for 20, 30 years.
Well, you know, the overall points, trade, freedom of trade and freedom of finance, I suppose, those are some of the key questions. Immediate reaction to those?
Okay, well, both sides in the UK seems to be having a battle of papers. And
What do you mean by that, battle of papers?
So the papers which are coming out from the other side seems to indicate that when the UK does Brexit, there's going to be about $3,200 negative hit for average household in the UK. Also, while Professor Minford mentioned that they will have increased trade with areas other than EU, right now the EU trade accounts for about 44% of UK trade. So that's going to be hit probably negatively. And then Professor Minford mentioned that, well, they will have a more free trade with countries outside UK. That's not been quite set yet. Because when UK does Brexit, they're going to have to decide on what their tariff rate is going to be vis-a-vis Europe and vis-a-vis rest of the world. So that's so we don't know quite what's going to be the effect yet. We don't know what kind of tariff level the UK will set.
So the current point from here to the point of greater freedom in trade, it's going to be a long way, basically, what you're saying.
Right. Actually, the WTO just released a report, and they seem to be saying that the British exports will take a hit for about £9 billion. Now, compared to their total exports, that's not going to be too much, but still, at least on the WTO side, they seem to be hinting that it's likely to be a negative hit rather than a positive hit.
I see. So Professor Yang's points all kind of like for the support of not thinking about Brexit, I suppose. Professor Lee, your take or like a reaction to the words, what would you say? The greater freedom in trade, greater freedom in finance?
Well, I just like to translate some, since you mentioned on the positive side, some remainers, but in a leavers side, okay? So remainers has different views. Actually, first of all, the UK has watched very closely the development of the EU economy, staying out of the European economy for some years. But the performance has been very much disappointing. So GDP growth. So they have realized, so there is not much learn from European Union, which is 28 members, except UK's 27 membership. So and second, they mentioned about free trade issues. Tariff is very important, but simply under WTO tariff, well, they pay less tariff than EU tariff. So if they imply EU tariff, they pay higher tariff in importing the goods. So which may be good for, as he mentioned, they stimulate consumption in the UK.
I see.
Right. And the second point, talking about the financial issues, because UK's main industry is finance. That's very correct. But as you pinpointed, the current trend in the EU zone is regulating financial industry. So take an example. There are some global financial institutions. They station their headquarters in London. not from their home country. Home country is member of EU, actually.
Right, right.
The case is UBS. So there might be some in the global financial institutions do not like this kind of EU system, which is being highly regulated, move their headquarters in the UK. And the financial industry, which is backed up by IT system, can create more jobs. Yes, according to many researchers, take an example, PricewaterhouseCoopers, if that Brexit may happen, as of today, in near term, in next 1 year, there will be job loss of 70,000 to 100,000. That's quite true.
Okay.
But that's today. But in the future, they may create more jobs. That's what they think, based on what is happening. So because they have to find another alternative solutions. So general perception about common people about this thing is, put it this way. They've been, they have a very expensive American Express black card.
Right.
Well, symbol of the wealth. They pay high membership fee, which is 13 billion per annum. Right? But they haven't got much benefit out of paying membership fee. And with the 13 billion, that can escalate, they can support to upgrade UK GDP by 0.5%.
Okay.
So that's what they think.
Let's talk about immigration. In that sense, how do we see immigration? Is this really a serious matter? Is it all political fanfare? I mean, Syria, Paris terrorism, and then Belgium bombing. The series of these developments that we are sharing through the news media. Is this all political perception, or what's going on here?
Well, I think part of the problem is that the EU allows, in fact, that's one of the conditions of the EU, is freedom of movement for workers. And what seems to be happening right now is that not only the type of refugees that you're talking about, not only the Islamic movement problem.
Workers?
But the East European workers. Now, UK is doing relatively better than other countries, and they've been at least more cosmopolitan than, say, places like Germany. So you see a lot of foreign workers moving into UK, and a lot of people in the UK feel that they're taking away jobs from the original UK inhabitants, and it isn't helped by their problems in manufacturing. They used to have a very strong steel industry, they used to have a very strong shipbuilding industry. Chances are those industries are going under, and chances are they're not going to recover.
So that story is quite something that's very familiar with us. I mean, in a way, United States, Donald Trump, all these people supporting him because of the concerns of the inflow of the, lower paid workers and so on. So. Once again, that's a familiar story, but we have to move on for the interest of time, Professor Lee, about the politics there, the confrontation between those currently in power and those who are challenging them.
In the UK, you mean?
Right, in UK here. What's the overall landscape? One thing that we notice is this is not necessarily partisan, right? Labour Party, Conservative Party, they are not necessarily divided as parties about this issue. Rather, within the Conservative Party, we see Cameron on one hand and then Boris Johnson on the other. Is this a fair way of describing the political landscape? So does this give more political dimension to the overall issue? Is that how we should understand it?
Well, I don't think this is a policy or party issues. The MPs, well, they're under the same umbrella. But they look at the more critical distinction is it political issue or economical issue? On the political front, I think that there are two things they're always mentioning about, job and money. Money means the economic value, of course. So on that regard, as Professor Yang mentioned, the job creation can be hindered by inflow or massive inflow of illegal immigrants, which is not happening now, but they are very much concerned. But on the economic front, they have seen a lot of negative results out of the EMU, European Monetary System. A single currency policy didn't work simply. So it's a matter, are we going to be better off under single currency system, or are we going to better staying out of the single currency policy? But the result shows they were okay, not staying within single currency policy. So there are many countries, Greek, not to mention, I don't want to repeat any more countries, but they're struggling here. So having seen that, I think there is general consensus built, either Labour Party or Conservative Party under these issues. But it's a matter of the current or future. But current losses versus the future prosperity. That's the issue they have to make a choice, I think.
I see. And in that regard, they say still a large size of undecided voters are out there. And each side, they're kind of trying to seek more of these undecided voters. Professor Yang, what do you see in terms of what we know for now, the undecided voters? Will they really sway overall the outcome, the final outcome, or are we going to see, are we going to see them evenly divided at the end and kind of like coming up with the kind of even results? What do we see?
Well, the polls at least show that they're evenly divided.
Okay.
And I think that's why the whole issue is more contentious. That's also partially why I mentioned the betting parlors at the beginning. Even though when you ask them how they personally feel about splitting or not, they're divided almost evenly.
Right.
Whether they expect it to stay or not, most of them expect that EU will stay in, the UK will stay in the EU.
Right.
So I think that sort of gives signal that at least when it comes down to the end, more
Right.
people will probably vote to stay in the EU than get out of it. Having said that, though, I think this does point out that there are some people who are very angry at EU. They don't want the EU to have control over UK, and that actually brings up a very interesting problem, because what the global financial crisis on the EU side showed
Right.
is that they actually need either to split completely or to combine even more so that they can run a unified fiscal and monetary policy.
Absolutely. Right.
And that's a problem which is going to affect not only UK but all the other countries in that EU.
Actually, that point about the issues for the Europe and the world, we need to move on to that part of the discussion later on. But right before that, I want to press our experts who are connected through the satellite here on the same issue about the undecided voters. First, my question goes to Professor Minford, who's supporting Brexit. We understand that, for instance, the many of the political, the policymakers and so on, and the people in the cultural industry, intellectuals, seem to be supporting the idea of staying inside the EU here, while business community, interestingly, actually supporting the idea of getting out of the EU here. So the industries and the sectors, they seem to be all divided. My question is, for the remainder of the time, for those people who are supporting the idea of Brexit, what would they have to do in order to court more of these undecided voters, the way you see it, Professor Minford?
Problem has been that we call project fear, created by the government, saying, if you leave, it'll be a terrible disaster, and big publicity, government and IMF, OECD, lots of economists inside the UK have all ganged up, to say it'll be a disaster. But as I explained, they got the assumptions wrong, deliberately, or whether by mistake or deliberately. They forgot about the benefits of free trade, which I'm sure you can understand, because you're a great trading nation in Korea. So they forgot about the benefits of free trade, and they just promoted the negatives. So our job is to explain to people the positives of economics, and to combat project fear, and to explain that these project fear, the government and so forth, have been either deliberately or unconsciously getting the assumptions wrong about what Brexit would mean. We have to explain that prices will come down, and that Britain become more competitive, and the other industries will expand.
Professor Minford emphasizing the greater need for greater free trade against the project fear here. Then we have to ask a question to Professor Ernst. While you're opposing the idea of Brexit here, what would you think those people who are on your side will have to do, to court more of these undecided voters within the remaining time?
As you mentioned, there are people who are undecided, and their numbers seem to be increasing recently. Now, when you look at the polls, young people are more likely to vote to stay in the EU. So it is the older generation who are likely to vote to leave the UK. Now, when you look at obviously these are the intentions, but then the evidence shows that the younger people, they don't vote, or they tend to vote a smaller percentage of them vote. They don't go to the polling stations, whereas the elderly people, they are more likely to vote. So although we have more people who are likely to vote to stay in the EU, they may not actually go and vote. So I think that's a major concern for the Remain camp, how they can get these people, especially young people, to the polling station.
Voter mobilization is the key point from Professor Erturk. Professors Minford and Erturk, thank you very much for your wonderful views and insights. Thank you, and hopefully you will join us again sometime in the future. Thank you very much. Okay, we have a special package prepared for our viewers. Let's take a look at it, and we'll continue on with our discussion right after this. I guess we have discussed enough about the different views, perspectives about costs and benefits of Brexit here, within the context of the UK, within the country itself. So let's talk more about what it means for the world and, for Europe first and then the world, right, and perhaps Korea as well. In your own mind, Professor Yang, we have discussed the concerns here, but let's expand it as a global context and all that. What are the key concerns of the Brexit as it relates to us, the world, and Europe?
Okay, well, the first thing that we have to consider is how it will affect the EU, and this actually depends on how the two sides negotiate for the exit.
Right.
But if it adds to the current instability, if it makes the EU economy more unstable, then countries like Greece, countries like Italy, they're still very vulnerable.
Right.
So it may actually lengthen the global slowdown that we see today. So that concerns me. That worries me a bit. And then for Korea, I don't think it'll affect that much because, exports to Korea is only about 1 or 2% of our total exports. So as long as the European economy does not completely collapse, I think we will see a minor negative shock, but we probably should be able to get over it.
Since we are talking about Korean trade with Korea, which we were going to talk about later on, but let's talk about it. The FTA with Korea, some people are saying now if there's a Brexit, Korea will have to negotiate with a separate FTA with the UK. Would you see that as the case? I'm sure you have uncertainties on all that, but your bet or your outlook, do we need a separate FTA with the UK?
Yes, I think we need a separate FTA, but I don't think that will create major problems. I don't think it will take longer than 1 year. It can be done easily because there is ongoing dialogue, and there is very much at this stage, as of today, there is ongoing bilateral discussions between UK and Korea, which is separate from Korea and EU. So I don't think there is many remaining issues that we need to resolve current barriers. So I don't look at that much as a critical point.
Okay.
More on the macro front, as he mentioned, trade, I will maybe touch slightly upon financial issues.
Okay.
Dr. Kim, as you know well, nowadays financial industry or global finance is interlinked.
Right.
More critical thing is interest rate, because that's one of the tools that support and stimulate its local economy.
Right.
And U.S. interest rate is very critical, but they are waiting for the Brexit result, which is my guess, actually.
Okay.
The FOMC meeting will be held June 14 to 15. Brexit is June 23rd. So the Federal Reserve cannot move independently, leaving behind the UK.
Okay.
But having said that, if UK does Brexit, then there will be, interest rate. Each individual countries will focus on to protect their economy respectively by using their own, stimulus package or interest rate. That I concern may escalate maybe a currency war.
So
Right.
the macroeconomic discoordination would be a big
Right.
concern in your mind.
Discord.
On that.
And the currency war may escalate, protectionism going forward.
Right.
Yeah.
And on that point, related point on that is the reaction from the EU members here with all those fears about financial the disturbance and the macroeconomic discoordination and all that. Would they force additional EU members to think about and consider and even seek exits? I mean, they're talking about Finland and Denmark thinking about those issues. So would we see very briefly, additional member of EU countries joining this line where Finland and Denmark are already standing?
Well, actually, Finland and Denmark, needless to mention their political link, but practically their export and economic ties with the UK is so great, Finland and Denmark, so they will be naturally pretty much damaged.
Oh, okay.
Right. So, not to mention political influence, I think they will consider, why should we stay in the EU? There will be consequential or sequential countries to think about it.
When Britain is out?
Yeah.
Okay.
And as maybe Spain as well.
Okay. Yeah. And we have to turn into the inside UK, the Great Britain here, Scotland. Scotland, that was the September of 2014, they held a referendum and they decided to stay inside UK and Great Britain here. But would you see, if there is a Brexit, if, that's a big if, but there is a Brexit, would you see Scotland rising up again saying, well, we like to be a part of EU, so we want to get out of UK. Would you see that possibility?
Well, I see both possibilities. I'm hedging the bets here. But during the discussions by the Scottish leader at that time, they wanted to be away from UK, but not away from EU.
Okay.
They expected to join the EU as an independent member.
So Scotland is for EU.
But against UK.
Right. So,
and the other side is that even though they lost the referendum, the Independence Party is now the largest party in Scotland.
Right.
So there's mixed signals going on there.
So we can possibly think about UK falling apart as a result of Brexit, if there is any. Continuing on that point, Professor Lee, for the interest of time, we have to consider the reactions from other other members of the EU. For instance, back in February 19th, when UK struck a agreement, sort of a special status. I mean, the term itself could actually make, I guess, Europeans in the continent kind of angry. Why is UK so special? Why do we have to give them special conditions and all that? What do you see in terms of their reaction to this so-called special status?
Well, I think that's an excellent point. And the UK has requested this special 4 conditions, which gives more freedom to UK to reject the policies being set by EU, and not to give too much benefit for illegal immigrants, kind of things. So, in that regards, those countries paying similar level of membership fee to EU. UK is number 2, but other countries, they will ask for special, renegotiation of everyone with the EU. I think that will really create cracks in the European Union. I think that's the another issue, because so far, single currency policy or single monetary policy stimulate the EU economy actually virtually has failed. So there is accumulating complaints. And then in particular for currency issues, Greek is the worst benefit from single currency versus to German currency. Well, Germany has most benefited. So there are a lot of complaints which has under the water, but it may come out of the water. Yes.
Professor Yang, United States here. Obama visited UK recently, and Boris Johnson, big supporter of Brexit, had all these interesting and controversial words against Obama, particularly because Obama was supporting the idea of UK staying inside the EU here. What do you see in terms of U.S. interest and U.S. leverage behind this issue within the remaining time?
I think the U.S. wants the UK to stay in the EU because they can use UK as a leverage within the EU. But if UK leaves, then that leverage is no longer going to be there.
You're talking about Anglo-Saxon leverage in a way? I mean,
in a way, but if they want
to
say affect the, if they want to get EU behind, say, the North Korean policy, then they can talk with EU directly, but they can also talk with UK, and UK is a voting member currently of the EU.
Right.
Now, if they split up, then UK will no longer be a voting member, so it won't have that loud of a voice within the EU political system. And that means the only channel that US has left is a direct channel, and that. Well, France and Germany, they don't tend to like U.S. point of view a lot of times.
Talking about France and Germany here, Professor Lee, if I may. France and Germany, we can largely assume that they're on the same side, but do you notice any slight difference in terms of their approach to this question of Brexit? Have they shown any subtle differences in terms of, like, for example, giving additional special status to the UK back in February and so on? Do you see any cleavage gap between Paris and
right, that's a very delicate point. I think that you are right. Even though they are strong allies to have created this EU and European Monetary Union system, but the country that pays most of the donation to other poor country is Germany. And France has been structured in the planning part, but the execution part was Germany.
I see.
But internally speaking, German people have been constantly against, giving money to poor countries without any clear proof they are doing their own homework. So Merkel has been on the front line, and the French president has been always trying to persuade her. And not to mention the currency issues and interest rate issues. Now, if UK does Brexit, many countries will recognize we should have our own sovereign right about our own currency, own interest rate, after having seen the poor result of EU system.
You mean many countries within EU?
Yeah, they may think, like it was Greek, they don't have any power to control the interest rate, and of course, foreign exchange interest rate and monetary policy, it's all under single sovereign policy.
Professor Lee, as a UK expert, we see UK being divided through this Brexit issue here, but once this is done, let's say there's no Brexit issue for now, it's a big assumption here, but what is UK's desire in terms of its relationship with the EU as a whole? What's their idealistic relationship? I mean, it's hard for us to really come up with clear picture. What do they want? Calling a country they as a one single unit is very difficult. I do understand, but in the minds of British policymakers and intellectuals, disregarding all the reality issues here, idealistically, what is the most desirable relationship between UK and the European Union?
Well, I like the nickname. You call me a UK expert. Thank you. Actually, I think fundamentally speaking, I don't think UK would fundamentally destroy or demolish whole current system. But this is just beginning of the negotiation as I see the current process. I think if UK fundamentally would like to come back in power in driving EU policy in many trade or reflecting more voices to financial issues, which has not been done so far. They've been staying out of they were politically linked, but monetary wise not. So I think they would like to recover their voices in the EU based on current result, poor performance that current regime, EU regime has done. And the second point, politically it's a great picture, but they don't have enough buffer to support poor countries to narrow the gap and polarization rich and poor countries. So that is a big issue. So having said that, UK, I think would like to talk to other EU to adjust these points, raising their voices, but ultimately to maintain this system, but not absolutely one-way dialogue, but they want two-way dialogue. They can reflect more voices in the UK, and they would like to be judged by other membership and get support from other EU membership countries. Those think they are less privileged than advanced countries.
I see. Okay. Now, for the remainder of the time, let's predict the future here. And let's go with this wild scenario of UK choosing Brexit. A lot of people don't want to think about it here, but we have to always consider different scenarios here. If somehow UK people choose Brexit for the next 2 years, Professor Lee, what happens?
Well, I don't think there will be serious problems. I'm not, as a Korean guy, I'm not supporting the Brexit, but in the consequence, over the next 2 years, UK has been establishing as a single entity out of the European Monetary Union system. They've been doing a lot of efforts. They have already established a very firm relations with many countries.
Right.
Right, trade treatment, many things.
Right.
So
And you know what my 2 years means? It's the negotiation period or like coordination period until they can formally exit the EU, right?
Right.
So you're saying the transition will just continue on?
Well, I think so, yeah.
Please, why?
2 years is good enough time to be prepared for the after exit period. And then the vice versa. Fundamentally speaking, the conventional economic system that we are living in, it will be quite different from the future. So I think it's a matter of the choice for UK people, to choose current suffer, pains, and take future prosperity. So I think they will think about it. However, the other macro consequences, global economic impact, that may happen for short term over the 2 years.
I see.
But fundamentally speaking, I think the UK will navigate through this kind of turmoil. I don't think there will be any serious problem.
Professor Yang, do you see any possibility, like if UK chooses Brexit for the next 2 years, the transition period, they could change their mind if EU could come up with different positions of negotiation or anything like that?
I don't really see them changing their mind once the referendum takes place, because the preparation for this referendum has been taking more than 2 years.
I see. Okay,
so I think once the referendum takes place, and if they choose Brexit, then they'll at least have to temporarily Brexit.
Okay.
They may choose to come back in about 10 years, but I think the preparation time is just not there for 2 years.
I see.
Having said that, I think whether they make a smooth transition within 2 years or whether they're going to have a lot of problems is how much both sides wants things to change. If both sides agree that, well, let's leave things more or less as it is, but just take care of very small points that we have disagreement over, then 2 years is going to be enough time. But if they decide that, well, we want to separate a lot of things, we want to have a completely different system, then if we're going to try to work how that's going to work out, then I think that's going to take a lot more than 2 years. I'm not sure if that 2 years is going to be enough time. For example, you're going to have to renegotiate, well, you're going to basically have to form EU-UK FTA. And if they want to maintain the same condition as they have right now, then that's not going to be a problem. Let's just keep everything that we have. That's going to take only months.
I see.
But if UK is very angry about some of the important provisions, if the EU doesn't want UK to have some of the rights because they're not going to be paying contribution or anything else, then the negotiations for 2 years on something this big, it's going to be impossible.
Outlook here, all the real intentions behind the scenes, and then again, we have all these different scenarios. So we'll have to wait and see how things unfold. But when, as I said, this program is aired, we will have about a week or less time before the big D-Day, June 23rd. Until then, I'm sure our viewers will keep in mind your wonderful perspective and insights that you have shared with all of us. Thank you very much for those. And we want to thank our viewers for having joined us for our discussion of these important issues. And for sure, for that reason, next time when we talk about all these important issues that matters for the world as well as Korea, we want to ask you and we want you to join us once again in this program, Upfront. Until then, this has been Kim Byung-ju. Goodbye.